Episode 36, The World is Moving. Cobal felt tense. For an hour he had stalked through the Koopa cruiser, hearing the hum of the engines in his eyes and feeling the gentle vibrations of the deck beneath his feet. A year ago he would have been overjoyed to be in a room with so many of the Mushroom Kingdom's greatest heroes, but right now, he was still shaken. Not even in the dangerous fight against the Black Kremling, who called himself the Silver Star, had he come closer to death.
That Koopa could have killed us all,
Cobal thought as he placed his hands on a red-colored railing, staring down into the cargo hold. Had what he said been true? Was this Skull's Fortescue really stronger than Luigi? Or even Mario? Cobal didn't want to entertain that thought. If the Koopa Empire really had somebody that powerful on their side, he could wipe out their new, hopeful resistance at Toad Town single-handedly. Across the pit leading into the cargo hold, Cobal saw King K. Rool sitting on a barrel, looking distraught. Clump and Crusha were with him, trying to comfort him.
"I had a lot o' memories with that ship,"
he sighed.
"Got it right back when I was going through my pirate phase. I still remember it. My blunderbuss smoking in my hands as that idiotic ape leapt over cannonball after cannonball." "Cheer up, boss,"
Crusha said, giving the king a hearty whack on the shoulder.
"The flying croc might be gone now, but it will live on in our hearts."
"Yeah," Clump agreed.
"When we restart the Kremling crew, we can even have it on one of our medals of honor." "Oh, shut up, you scallywags,"
K. Rool hissed. Cobal turned away from the sight and climbed one of the Koopa cruiser's thin stairwells, making for the bridge. He passed Peasley along the way. He was sitting with his back to a barrel, deep in conversation with Captain Toad.
I don't know if I can do it,"
Cobal heard him sigh.
"When the Empire falls, the Beanish survivors will look to me as a leader. I've never had it in me to be king. I was always off flying around the kingdom instead of reviewing my nation's tax policies. And yet it falls to me to rebuild the Bean Kingdom almost completely from scratch. Why, I'll even have to build a new castle and castle town. No Beanish king has had such a dire task since the fall of the soybean civilization." "Ah, cheer up, Prince,"
Captain Toad smiled.
"Hey, you're the superstar of the Bean Kingdom, remember? You're like their own version of Mario. Everyone will be more than happy to pitch in and help you, and if you really can't do something well enough, you can always hire an advisor or something." Yes, you're right,"
Peasley said in a relieved voice.
"My mother's Lady Lima was an excellent help to her, you know."
Cobal left them and walked into the bridge. Through the main window, he could see that they were by now passing over land, although it was dark and cloudy, so it was difficult to see which kingdom they were in. Mountains pierced the clouds like islands springing from the ocean. Funky Kong was at the wheel, piloting the ship with one hand like one would drive a car. As the Koopa cruiser had been designed for a Koopa's body proportions, its designers had not thought about making it easy for someone who was twice the size of an average member of the species to drive it. Cobal quickly located Strike, who was standing in one of the corners with the aged Toadsworth, who was sitting on the ground, looking near ready to collapse. A purple-colored Cheep Cheep was tending to him. As Cobal approached, Toadsworth tried to stand, but the Cheep Cheep quickly stopped him.
"Oh, no you don't,"
she said sternly.
"Your bones are too stiff right now and you're still in too much shock. What you need is lots of rest. And a proper bed." "Thank you, Sushi my dear,"
Toadsworth sighed.
"Oh, I'm afraid this old body isn't what it used to be."
"Strike," Cobal said, coming up to him.
"I need to talk to you." What is it?
Strike asked, crossing his arms.
That Koopa,
he admitted, shuddering in spite of himself. Skull's shining orange eye flashed through his vision.
I need to know who he is. I'd like to know that too, Cobal.
Strike replied, glancing out the main window briefly before turning back to him.
I've been in the Koopa troop for quite some time. Officers gossip a lot. You would think a Koopa with that much power would be well known in the army. Even if he was a member of a top-secret division, there would still be rumors, legends. Tall tales most probably would have even believe. But no.
Strike shook his head.
Forgive me if I'm mistaken. But I don't believe that Skull's Fortescue has any affiliation with the Empire whatsoever.
Cobal felt his blood run cold. That only made things worse. If there were others out to get them, a group which had people as powerful as Skulls on their side.
7 stars.
Cobal thought, remembering the strange magical powers that the Silver Star had used.
They must want revenge for what we did to one of their leaders.
If there was somebody as powerful as Skulls working with them, though, it was likely enough that they were no ordinary crime syndicate. The funny thing about Skulls was that, even though he claimed to be a veteran of the First Koopa War, he didn't look a day over 30. Had he been lying, or?
I'm meaning to ask that old Toad. Toadsworth, I believe his name is, about him. He lived through the war, he'd remember something. The chap seemed familiar,
Toadsworth said, looking up at them.
But I would have only heard of him. The front lines were no place for a bloke like me, not even when I was a boy. Still, I will give it some thought. Skull's Fortescue. It does ring a bell.
Cobal was about to say something, when Skulls cut him off.
There are more important things at stake right now, Cobal,
he said. His face looked troubled.
We've escaped from Skulls, let's worry about him another day. I just got a call. From who?
Cobal asked.
Captain Sheriff. W. What?
Cobal exclaimed. His heart began to beat. Sure, they were far away from the Empire now, but the thought of their treachery being discovered seemed terrifying to him.
He was angry, of course, but gave us an exception, because we both were so effective in Conquer Canyon. You might be interested to know that the war is going poorly in Sector 2. Conquer Canyon fell a long time ago. The entire Sprixie Kingdom is under Neo-Empire command, and the army that we fought in is now fighting in the Chai region of Sarasa land. As for our squad, Shada, that boo who always kept to herself, and Funjin, that pessimistic toad, are both dead. Everyone else is still fighting hard though.
Cobal breathed a sigh of relief. He had never known Shada and had actually disliked Funjin despite him being a forced Mushroom Kingdom recruit, but he had rather liked the company of his other squad mates even though he hadn't had much time to get to know them. He was especially glad to know that Shroomer was still alive. That innocent toad deserved better than to die on the battlefield.
What are we going to do? Are we going to ignore the captain, or do we head to Chai? We aren't going to ignore the captain.
Strike replied.
You may do whatever you like, but I have a duty. I've enjoyed this, Cobal. I believe together we've done many things that will help bring an end to the Koopa Empire and the return of the old, proud, Koopa Kingdom. But against a threat like the Neo-Empire, I have to stand with my people. I won't give you any orders, Cobal, but I would appreciate if you would come along. It would be easier to come up with an alibi if you came back with me. Sheriff believed that I was headed to Isle Delfino to visit my dying father, and had taken you with me as a bodyguard since we were passing through Neo-Empire territory. He would be suspicious if you didn't come back.
Cobal sighed. Normally, he wouldn't have minded, much as he hated fighting under the Koopa flag, battling the Neo Empire was an important task. Even Mario had made alliances with Bowser, again common enemies. But his father, they had just been reunited. He wanted nothing more than to make some memories with him, battling against the Empire together and learning Gonzalez Jr.'s legendary Glitz Pit moves that had earned him the champion's belt.
"I'll think about it,"
he finally said.
"Good."
Strike nodded.
"And one more thing. We haven't been assigned to Chai. We're being put into a huge invasion force, commanded by Prince Bowser Jr. himself. We're planning to be the arrow to the heart of the Neo Empire. The decisive blow that will knock Prince Ludwig from his throne."
Ten Koopa battleships moved through the misty sky. They were decorated with the colors of Bowser Jr., bearing his figurehead and his flag. The roar of their engines filled the sky as they crossed over the Mushroom Mountains, lined the border between the Koopa Kingdom and the Mushroom Kingdom. General Fortuga's Flame, ex-governor of the Mushroom Kingdom, sat on the command seat of his flagship, watching the jagged grey peaks drift by. For a typically energetic Koopa, he was feeling unusually sullen. Things were not going well for him. He had known for years that he was not well liked as a member of Koopa High Command. His peers thought he was too young, too arrogant, and too inexperienced. They were all fools, of course. It had been his brilliant strategy which had destroyed the Snow-Mad Armada when they had sailed for Neo Bowser City, wiping out a rival to Imperial Dominion in one fell swoop. And it had been his brilliant leadership that had prevented the Mushroom Kingdom, the greatest opposer to Emperor Bowser, from rising up in revolution. That is, except for when he had made that one, critical mistake. Flame clenched his fist as he sat in his seat, watching his crew at their control consoles. Luigi. He had failed to attack Luigi. If he had brought his battleships down upon Toad Town as soon as Boom Boom's garrison had fallen, he'd have proved himself. He would have been the one to have taken down the second Mario brother, a hero who had personally beaten many of his more respected cohorts at the table. Only the Emperor himself could boast of such an honor. But he had blown it. No, he told himself. There was still a chance. 10 battleships, each with a full garrison on board, their cannons loaded and their holds stocked up with bombs. Toad Town, long a symbol of resistance against the Koopa throne, would be razed to the ground. And he, of course, would be sitting in the Grand General's seat by the year's end.
"Blue Shell, fetch me some Koopa tea,"
he said to the Boomerang Bro who was standing beside him.
"A man needs to calm themselves before battle, don't you think?"
Blue Shell sighed.
"A battle which would have been easier won if you had just listened to me to begin with, General." "Oh, shut up, Blue Shell."
Flame scowled. While it was true that the Boomerang Bro, the only member of Boom Boom's garrison to escape, had informed him of Luigi's return ages ago, he refused to admit that his secretary was right. Flame straightened himself in his seat and gazed out at the window. The sun was rising, light streaming over the mountains. It was a new day, and the beginning of a new chapter of his shining career. By the time it was done, his victory at Neo Bowser City would be forgotten.
"Grand General Fortuga's Flame. The man who slew Luigi,"
Flame said aloud. It had a nice ring to it. Even if, Flame admitted, there were a surprisingly large amount of people in the world who still only knew him as the Green Mario. The Fire Flower base was silent. Yoshi sat in his office at his desk, his chair creaking as he shifted his weight in it. The room was dark, lit only by the light of Yoshi's computer and the orange glow of the big screen from the main control room, which was filtering through the room's glass door. Yoshi felt strange. This was Fire Flower's finest hour. The destruction of Neon City, one of the Koopa Empire's main power bases. Why, for all they knew, Roy Koopa, one of Bowser's cruelest children, could now be dead, never to trouble the innocent people of the Mushroom Kingdom and beyond again. So why was it feeling more like a defeat? Luigi's words haunted Yoshi. Was it true? Was he really becoming just as bad as the Koopas? Yoshi shook his hand, thinking back to his past. Luigi had always been so weak, so helpless. He remembered rescuing him from Kamek all those years ago. Kamek. Yoshi had heard the old Magic Koopa was dead now. His age had finally caught up with him and he had succumbed to the Koopa fever a few years ago. Yoshi remembered feeling strangely sad about it. Of course, he was glad that Bowser's chief advisor, the one who had molded him into the tyrant he was now, was dead. But dying of sickness in bed seemed a rather anticlimactic end for a foe like Kamek. Yoshi had always imagined that they'd meet in battle, one last time. It was as if everything was gone now, Yoshi realized. His eyes fell on the picture on his desk, he and his many-colored friends posing by the super happy tree after they had recovered it from the young Prince Bowser. Most of them were dead now, and the ones that lived were working in the work camps that now covered Yoshi's island, building weapons and ships for the Empire. He had lost so many good men and women trying to free them that eventually he had just stopped trying. His oldest friends, his home, Mario, Princess Peach. Even Luigi was gone now. It was those Koopas, Yoshi told himself. He slammed his fist onto his desk, shaking his picture. It fell down flat on its frame. Emperor Bowser and his children and his generals. They all deserved it. If he had 1,000,000 nuclear bombs he'd use them. They all deserved to suffer. And the sooner Luigi and all the rest of the rebels who were still out there realized that, the better. Outside of the Fire Flower headquarters, Toadificus stood in an alleyway, gazing up at the murky red skies that covered everywhere near Koopa Central. The green-capped, mustached Toad lit a cigar and puffed on it for a moment. Yoshi. His boss was in one of his moods again. What that could mean, he didn't know. Toadificus heard the flap of wings and looked up to see a Paragoomba fly down. This Paragoomba, unlike most other Paragoombas, wore a dark green visor.
You called, Green Star?
He asked. Toadificus took another puff on his cigar.
Yes.
He replied softly.
I want you to send a message to headquarters, and make sure it reaches my fellows at the board. Tell them that Yoshi will probably strike again soon. I will return myself soon, once I have more information. As you wish, sir.
The Paragoomba replied, before flying away with a flap of his wings. He was gone as quickly as he had appeared. Toadificus took another smoke of his cigar as he walked back into the side door leading into the base. There were dramatic events unfolding all over the world, he thought. But the ones who came out on top were the ones who watched. And waited. It was always dark in the volcanic regions of the Koopa Kingdom, and the rising sun only transformed the sky from pitch black to dark purple. The Koopa Kingdom was a vast land, and one which was very diverse, but many people from the Mushroom Kingdom only thought of what they called Dark Land, the volcanic wastelands. Said wastelands were massive and rugged, full of volcanoes and fiery seas. The only settlements, save for Flame City next to Bowser's castle, were fortresses and factories belonging to the Koopa Troop. It was a harsh, seemingly impassable land. Yet a land the Mario brothers had traversed more times than anybody knew. Kami Koopa flew through the air, her wrinkled hands gripping her broom tightly. She looked up at the brightening sky, and urged her broom to move faster. It was far more pleasant to fly over dark land during the night, when there was a comfortable sort of coolness, compared to the blisteringly temperatures which, if not for the spells of heat protection she had placed upon herself, would have been unbearable for a Koopa of her advanced age. Cammy flew over a skeletal fortress, the long dead tree's black branches seeming to reach up at her like hands. Little puffs of violet smoke came from the end of Cammy's broom as she continued over the forest. Up ahead, a massive lava sea loomed, stretching up until the horizon and the tall, jagged, purple-tinted mountains. A stone pathway jutted out onto the lava, twisting and turning, and at the very end there was a castle. The castle was called Bowser's Castle, but that didn't mean much since nearly every castle in the Koopa Kingdom was called Bowser's Castle. Really, Cammy thought, her master wasn't very creative with names. This particular castle was far from the most elaborate to bear the name. It was a simple stone fortress, its towers encircled by decorative rings of spikes. Few events of note had happened in this castle, too. It had been where the interdimensional sorcerer Count Bleck had abducted the Koopa Troop and the Mario Brothers, but aside from that it had played host to few epic encounters. Yet despite all of this it held a special place in Cammy's heart. It was one of the oldest castles in the Koopa Kingdom, first constructed over 1,000 years ago, and it had played host to more Koopa kings than any other. Bowser had been raised in this castle. When King Morton had died in the war and the Koopa Troop had been splintered, this castle had been where Cammy had fled to with the rest of his squad to sign under the authority of Kamek to defend the true heir to the throne. In the brutal succession war, Kamek's faction had crushed the armies of Morton's remaining generals and established Prince Bowser firmly as the king of the Koopas. The war had given Cammy several opportunities to show off her magical prowess, and it wasn't long until she had become second only to Kamek in the Magic Koopas of the kingdom. This castle had been Lord Bowser's seat from time to time, while he was building or rebuilding his new castles that were more to his liking, of course. Bowser had been building castles since he had been 4, and, if the huge imperial citadel in Koopa Central was any indication, would probably go on building them until he died. But it was not sentimental value that interested Cammy today. The Magic Koopa urged her broom closer, over the crooked path. She could see no soldiers on the castle walls. It was seldom used these days, and with the civil war brewing all over the world, she'd be surprised if there were more than 10 soldiers guarding it at all. This castle had been where Bowser had raised his family, and there was a good chance that it would still contain certain records. Records that Bowser had tried to have erased. When Bowser had married the beautiful Laveria, he had first brought her to live with him in one of the castles he himself had built, the one which was modeled after a huge statue of himself. This castle had been the first castle Bowser had built, and as such, its design which had been pieced together but some very stressed architects from the young Bowser's crayon sketches, made no sense whatsoever. There were too many rooms full of nothing but bridges over lava, and too many doors which required 4 people to stand on certain platforms in order for them to open. Laveria wanted some place more practical to raise her family, so, while Bowser ordered an intense interior remodel along with an exterior redesign to more resemble his adult self, the Koopa family had moved to this older, more simple castle. Queen Laveria would never live to see the renovations completed. Not long after the birth of her youngest child, she was murdered. As Cammy suspected, the castle was unguarded. She flew around it, making sure that this was completely true, before bringing her broom to a hover right next to a tower window. Cammy pointed her wand at it, and the window glowed purple before swinging open. Cammy flew her broom into the castle and floated to the ground. The room Cammy was in was thick with cobwebs and dust. Most likely, she reflected, nobody had set foot inside of it for decades. It was a tiny room, with a small table and chair set before the window, a fireplace, and a bookshelf of dusty old books. Above the fireplace was a picture of Bowser, the Koopalings, all looking far younger than they did now, or even in the days when they had fought the Mario brothers, and a beautiful red-shelled Koopa with red hair tied back. She was an ordinary Koopa Troopa. Only Koopas of the royal bloodline had the large, more intimidating builds of Bowser and his children. Cammy stared at the picture for a moment, looking at Laveria sadly.
"What a sad waste,"
she said, shaking her head.
"If she was still alive, we wouldn't be in this mess to begin with."
Then Cammy began to search the room. She found what she was looking for without trouble. It was a diary, its cover a picturesque painting of the old palace. The old palace was, as the name suggested, one of the older castles belonging to Bowser, although some said that this castle went back even further, although it was most certainly eclipsed by the old palace in grandness. It was designed in the old traditional style of the Koopa Kingdom, over 1,000 years old, and Laveria had always loved it, although she had never lived there. It was scarcely fit for anything but a historical relic, and Bowser had only used it once as a fortress, when he stopped by it on his way to the moon for one of his many attentions to marry that ridiculous princess. Laveria had loved writing in her diary, too. Cammy opened it and flipped through the pages. She wished she could read the entire thing and recall long-lost times, but now wasn't the place for that, and it felt inappropriate to read the dead queen's private thoughts. There was one thing that she had to read, however. The last entry. Laveria had written almost every day. It was like a record of her life. And, Cammy hoped, her death. The last entry was brief.
"Roy pushed Bowser Jr. again today, and I had to ground him from television. I'm worried he's growing into a bit of a bully, so I'm going to have to be stern with him. On top of that, Morton broke Lemmy's doll and they've both been crying all day. I hope tomorrow will be much more cheerful. I'm going on a nighttime stroll to clear my head. It's surprising how beautiful the forest can be, even though it's been dead for centuries. It's beautiful in a haunting sort of way, I guess. I especially love that one lava fall and how it shines on the bark. It's the kind of thing that could only happen here in Dark Land, and, even though I miss the lush hills of my hometown, it reminds me that there's beauty everywhere, if you only know where to look."
Cammy closed the book. She had been waiting for years to read that passage. If she had tried to do it when Bowser still lived in the Koopa Kingdom, he would have been so angry she could have been thrown in the dungeons. But now he was far away in what had once been called the Metro Kingdom, and quite distracted as well. She wondered if he missed her. She had been gone for 2 years, doing all the research she could find on Laveria. There were suspicious things, to be sure. While Bowser had tried his best to forget about her and had banned mentioning her name, typically the murder of a queen would be world news. But it had been covered up from the Mushroom Kingdom to the clouds of Nimbus Land, and she had fair reason to suspect that somebody had been trying to cover it other than Bowser. Somebody powerful enough to affect the entire world. That was why she had to get to the bottom of this. Cammy summoned her broom and got on it. More likely than not, that lava fall in the dead forest was where Laveria Koopa had died. It would be easy to find. Once she reached there, Cammy would use an ancient, powerful spell that she had gone through incredible pains to discover and to master. It would open a window into time, allowing her to see exactly how Laveria had died. Then she'd tell Bowser. It would send him into a murderous rampage, of course, but Cammy didn't mind that.
"A little fire breath will do his grunginess some good,"
she fretted to herself, flying out of the window. The sun was continuing to rise, and the heat rose from the lava lake.
"Besides,"
she thought as she flew back over the castle towards the forest,
"if he remembers his first love, perhaps he'll forget about that stupid princess and make an end of all this. An old maid can only hope, right?"
With that thought in mind, Cammy flew over the twisting stone path, her broom trailing faint purple smoke behind it.